Scoop up the savings with digital doorbusters at ShopRite. This week, grab two 48-ounce cartons of Turkey Hill ice cream for just $5 with a digital coupon. And red ripe strawberries are now just $1.99 each with your digital coupon. Wait, there's more. The deals just keep on coming. Grab a 12-ounce pack of Oscar Mayer bacon for only $3.99 each when you load your digital coupon. Download more digital deals in the app or on ShopRite.com. ShopRite. Check out happy.
You're a podcast listener, and this is a podcast ad. Reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Lips and Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a reproduced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience with Lips and Ads. Go to lipsandads.com now. That's LIBSYN ads.com.
I would have waited an eternity for this. It's over, Prime.
Welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am Chris Murman, and I am joined today by my fellow board members. I am joined by Jay Hrcsko. Jay, what's up?
How's it going?
And Andrew Leff. What's up, Andrew?
What's going on?
Andrew is more chill than usual. So we are joined today by not just someone that I respect, one of the first Agile books that I read when we started talking about transformation. I thought, hey, do you think maybe we could get this guy on? Mainly just because I like talking to him, and also he has a public vendetta against Ryan Lockard. So I thought we could let him air his grievances against Ryan Lockard. So Jason Little, welcome to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Thanks. What's up, guys?
Do you have any words for Ryan Lockard if he's listening in the world?
Well, originally it was supposed to be to dye his hair orange, but that's not going to work. So we will settle for the beard.
Okay, so
but it would have to be blue, because we'd have to use the Oiler blue instead of the Oiler orange.
So dyeing his beard Oiler blue, that's the gauntlet's been thrown down. Now, we know Ryan Lockard to be a Welch and someone that runs from conflict. So I can't say that we can promise that it'll happen, but I do have contact with his wife, and I can in a positive way, right? Then I can make her make him do it, and then we can maybe post it to Instagram or something. Did I make that sound as awkward as possible, guys?
Just keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keep going.
All right. Yeah. So for those that do not know Jason, I will let him intro himself in a second. But for those that haven't read his work, he wrote several years ago Lean Change Management, which had a profound impact on me and how I saw the way that change happens. His blog posts and he makes reference to it in the book is this idea of, well, you need to remodel a room in your house, and when you kind of have an idea of the number of the amount of materials, the amount of time, but you start pulling walls down, you start pulling floors. You didn't realize it was there, so you realize you plan just enough to get started, and then you get moving. And I use that, Jason, that line of, you plan just enough to get started and then you get moving, with every single client I use. And I know I sound like a fanboy here, but I don't care. I'm really appreciative of your work, and I'm glad you wrote it. So how would you introduce yourself to someone that doesn't know your work today?
Wow. I'd use that one. That sounded pretty good. I think starting off in IT and moving into programming and into management, working for startups, naturally primed me to fall into this change work. So I think, having come from a space of having change inflicted on me through various acquisitions and reorganizations and stuff like that, you start to feel what it's like. And I think a lot of coach consultant folks have forgotten what it's like to be an employee in a company with stuff being forced on you. And it just brings a whole different perspective. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with somebody about this, just how when you start to dig a little bit deeper about how you grew up and early jobs and things that you had, I always worked in the service industry, always. And so, waited tables and worked in walk-up kitchens and this type of stuff. And you just develop this servant attitude over time. And I think that, and working at a call center and IT and just this whole helper mentality primed my way into thinking of, serving organizations instead of coming in with a, big agile stick.
Was that a help desk, like an IT help desk that you were answering phones for?
Oh yeah, a long time ago. That's what led to getting into programming, because we used to use, this was for Nortel networks back in the day when people knew who Nortel networks were. And we had these massive binders that had all our call center routing information in it. And myself and another guy, we used, what was it? O'Reilly's Website Pro Cold Fusion and Windows NT 3.5, and built a web app with a Microsoft Access database, so we could just have a simple lookup table, because we were tired of flipping through these big ass binders. And that's what, got me into programming in the first place.
Like 5 people in the audience just fell out of their chairs going, I know.
Yeah. And the cool thing was we got in trouble because we started to update our signatures for our email. We called ourselves the Web Foundation because we were huge wrestling fans. So we wanted to model our 2-person program team after the Hart Foundation tag team. I remember the manager was awesome, but one day he just came over. He's like, "Okay, guys, you gotta dial it back a little bit."
So you were the real life IT crowd. Like you were those two guys sitting in there. Like you were just saying A instead of their accent, right?
Oh yeah. We used to take screenshots. You remember those illegal operation errors from Windows 95? So we'd take screenshots of some of the call center guys, their desktop, and then we would overlay that on top of it and set it as their background. And we'd unplug their keyboard. So when they would try to do something like, oh, it's locked up, and they'd restart the computer, and then we'd just sit there and just try not to laugh, and they'd be looking around, and they'd try to type again when it restarted, and they're like, fuck, and they hit restart again. Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Now I have to ask Jason, which one were you? Were you Brett the Hitman, or were you Jim the Anvil? Like, which one were you?
I was Brett the Hitman, because the other guy was very much built like Jim the Anvil. Yeah.
Okay.
And I gotta say, I'm totally geeking out over the Windows reference, because literally you could do the same. Like, we used to do that on the server farms running, NT, and we used to put the blue screen of death on the screensaver and then unplug the keyboard. So they would think the servers would go down. So that's a great story.
The closest I ever got to that was if you didn't lock your computer when you went to like the bathroom or something, someone would kind of sneak into your computer. And I don't know if you remember that Biker Fox guy, the guy that was the cyclist that was famous for, riding his bike around with rainbow colors on. And they would take pictures of him and make that your background. So like if you came back and saw that, they say, oh, you've been Biker Fox, which means you forgot to, as if that's going to shame you into locking your computer. I'm like, well, okay, whatever. So speaking of change and kind of being turned on to it early, right? So part of your bio that you write in the book that is kind of part of your story is in 2008, you went to an experiential conference that kind of introduced you to more of these change ideas. And we're in a session that literally explained to you what organizational change is like. Mm-hmm. And you were telling me that you never told it over an interview. So I thought maybe to kind of trot out that old story. So tell us the story about the star trying to get to Joanna Rothman and what just kind of set the stage for the audience. Like, this was how Jason really experienced what change for an organization was like very early on in his journey.
Okay. So I was 3 months into my first enterprise coaching engagement. So it was 10, 11 years ago, I guess. And one of the coaches I was working with, Eric Mead, and he said, you should go to this AYE, Amplify Your Effectiveness, with Jerry Weinberg, Steve Smith, Esther Derby, Johanna Rothman, and Don Gray, and go to the thing that makes you feel the most uncomfortable. And I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. So I signed up and went, and I went to a session around the introduction to the Satir change model. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but yeah, Steve Smith was the guy who was running it, and we're sitting in a big circle. This thing's only limited to 74 people, and 5 sessions running at a time. So I think there were probably 40 of us or something like that in the session. And they go around the room and they ask everybody what are your thoughts about change? And when he starts it off, he says, okay, this group of people is going to be the status quo. This group of people is going to be the new status quo. This group is going to be chaos. This group is going to be the foreign element, which are some of the components of the infamous Satir J curve. And I was in the old status quo group. And our job was to take the star, who was just one randomly selected person, to stay in one corner of the conference room. So he said, whatever you do, that's the status quo. That person can't change. You got to keep them there. That's your job, is the status quo. And the new status quo's job was to move him across to the other corner of the conference room. And this was a massive, massive conference room. Think the Big Agile conference, main keynote area sized conference room.
Oh, wow.
So a lot of open space in this thing. And chaos and the foreign element, he said, your job is to disrupt. He said, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's go. So we started getting stuff from the hotel, and we physically built a structure to keep him in the corner of the room. We stacked tables on top of each other and hung curtains, and we stole those big comfortable chairs from the hotel lobby and the plants and stuff. And
you built a wall. You built a wall, America.
Yes.
We built a wall.
Yes. I that was in my brain before I told the story. I thought, I'm not going to go there. So
I'll say it.
It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge.
Yes,
it's going to be the best wall I've ever seen. The best people.
It's a huge wall.
Yeah, in Colorado.
Yes, that's right.
So as we're doing that, chaos and the foreign element, they're literally just clapping and singing and banging stuff on walls and making noise. And the new status quo starts taking part of the wall down to get at the star, to get them across. So we're trying to keep things up.
Starting a fight. They're basically starting a fight.
We started shoving each other, and then Steve had to put his hands up in the middle and just yell out, all right, stop. And this is all, change agents that go to this thing. So all these people who should probably know better. And there were a few lessons. One was, it doesn't matter how smart you are, you can't control the emotion of change. But then something really cool happened was, I don't know how somebody in the new status quo team found out, but he found out that the star was a huge fan of Johanna Rothman. So he went next door to her session and said, hey, can you come over here and talk to this guy for a bit? And then once the star found out, he knocks the wall down and he just goes barreling through to the other side to talk to her. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. But when I wrote the first chapter of the book, I remember Jürgen Apollo was my writing coach, and he was helping with reviewing stuff. And he read the first chapter, and he's like, this is shit, rewrite it. I'm like, okay. So then I wrote this story. I remembered this story, and then I remembered, well, we have this negative connotation of change, that people resist change and they go through anger and denial and shock and all these negative things. And for this guy, it was, oh, that's awesome. I don't care how hard it is. I'm going to that side of the room. So there was such a huge motivating factor for the star to get to the other side.
Independent of, he went to that other side, independent of what the new status quo was doing. He was motivated, and you say this in your book, he was motivated by something that had nothing to do with the new status quo, right? Yeah. And nothing the old status quo could stop it.
Yeah.
Right. So you said you're 3 months into your first, your first enterprise coaching gig. And in the book, you talk about in more detail just how nervous you were being amongst these people, kind of a thing. What is that experience like I'm sure that there were not just light bulbs over your head, but everybody's head, right? This exercise opens up a lot of eyes. What did that do to you?
There isn't a week that goes by that I don't think about an experience from that conference and that session, because there were so many things that just turned my brain onto stuff that just working in an agile way has always felt natural. And for a lot of people, it's the same thing. I mean, this stuff isn't hard. It's really easy. And I know I got locked into this. This is brain dead easy. Why aren't these idiots in this organization doing it? And you kind of get into this. I see this with agile coaches today. They go to 10 million meetups and take 5,000 different kinds of training, and they get their skills to a level that's 8 levels above where the organization is. And it's really frustrating to deal with that gap. And I think I was kind of at that spot. And this experience in that conference was, holy shit, there's a lot more going on that I'm not even tuned into a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting in the sense of, I feel like after I started to read your books and as well as the other publications you put out, it completely created a very similar paradigm shift in my coaching at an enterprise level, and constantly beating myself up in the sense of, this is easy. Why are we overcomplicating it? Like tenfold, right? Like we're over engineering everything.
To Jason's point about how, the star was a big Johanna Rothman fan. So somebody wittily, they came up with a novel solution. They got Johanna Rothman in the room, and this person went head first into the change with their motivations. It made me think of Niels Flegling has a book, Open Space Beta, where he talks about how there's no such thing as change resistors. There's people who have not been given who have not been motivated properly to see what's in it for them, based upon where they're coming from, who are now empowered to say, I want to be over on the other side of the wall, regardless of what happens, because it hits a note for them. And this ties to, that ties to stuff we were talking about before we start recording about the spiral and, different motivators for different people. That's the thing when I read Jason's book, I took me away is, okay, if you find the right motivation, the right lever to pull, you can basically get anybody to do anything.
And I have just a quick question too, and maybe this is for later on or another topic, but I would be interesting to hear, one of the things when I'm doing like a lean change management workshop is in a room full, whether they're leaders, stakeholders, or just strategists, it exposes the fact that they don't know a whole heck of a lot. So it's almost like controversial to get them, it's nice to get them along, but it's interesting to see how they can't formulate a simple statement or a vision statement, and they just can't wrap their head around that type of concept. So I'm not sure if that's unique to me. I would think not, but I'd be curious to hear, Jason, how, if you've experienced a lot of that, especially in a room full of leadership.
Yeah, they have conversations they normally don't have. It's pretty easy to do something in isolation or farm it out to your change people to come up with the perfect one pager or whatever it is. And once they're actually in a room talking about why is this important to the organization, to us, to our people, it gives a drastically different perspective. And the thing with vision is it doesn't matter as much, if at all nowadays, to formulate a strong vision statement, because I think we all kind of get what's being said when we want to quote unquote transform. We know we want to go east. We don't know exactly where the roads are. We don't need to wordsmith something to death to get people to align to it, because there's the false assumption that we create this statement and we send it out in a newsletter and everybody comes along for the ride. It's the conversation that creates it is the important part. And then when we get in those conversations, people go, yeah, why the hell are we doing this in the first place? Like, things are actually going pretty,
what I feel like you said without saying it is that like these leaders have so many, like they have so much on their plates transforming, which for all of us that are not just recording this podcast, but listening to this podcast, like transformation is a big deal to us. Like we have dedicated, if not all of our careers, at least a part of it, to transforming the way that we work, like looking at work a different way, making work a different way. It's the 5th or 6th highest, most important thing with my current clients' leadership. Like they've got so many other things to do. So if you can make transformation a checklist, fucking done. Like, let's just go, right? Like, oh, you can make it, if you do these things, we're transformed. Great. That means that I can mark this thing done, and I can do these other things that I also have to do in my day that are also important. And that's a real, like, that's why the STAR story matters so much to me, because we can have the new status quo we want, but it does, if we don't make it relevant to these folks, they don't care. Like, it doesn't really matter to them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did a session with an internal team of a national company I can't say the name of, but one of the largest in this particular region of the world, and 50 some odd managers, directors, and a VP talking about their transformation. And it was, well, there's nothing we can do yet because we don't have a solid vision from above to execute on. And we did this exercise with this card game that just recently released around, if we're talking about transformation, what are the most important dimensions we need to look at right now for next week, for the next month, for the next quarter? Let's forget the 10-year transformation. Let's just focus on the most important things to do right now in this context. And after the 2-day workshop, they realized the vision didn't really matter at all, because they're still going to have to figure this out as they go along. And they need to get to a deeper sense of purpose around why they're being asked to do this, not just what we usually see in corporations, which is a bullet point about why this is important, because that's always from the organization's perspective. I was in another private session where the CEO, all he talked about was money. You know, our urgency is to increase revenue by 6%. And everything was money, money, money. And he actually said, when it came to employee engagement and empowerment and work ethic, baseball only has 3 strikes. Why are we giving people 10? And I was like, what the And I brought that up in the workshop I did with the people. And I said, now imagine this. Imagine you go to a tester on a team and you go, okay, the urgency for change is to increase revenue by 6%. Do you think he's going to care if he makes a millionaire a few extra $1 million bucks? Probably not. If you frame the message, we're transforming because imagine that you're writing the healthcare software that nurses are using to take care of your sick grandma. So you radically change the conversation when you go to purpose instead of what we normally go to, which is faster, better, cheaper. And faster, better, cheaper is always going to be a thing. But we have choices. So if we're choosing to transform and we're not being congruent about how we're acting and what we're saying, you're going to get what you're going to get. You're going to get process improvement. And that's probably okay in some companies. Just be transparent about that. Like, don't call it a transformation, call it a process improvement program. Somehow in Agile, we've shamed process improvement as being evil and horrible. But for some companies, this might be the best they can do. Personally, I think it's bullshit and it won't really get you the results you want. But for some companies, maybe that's the best they can do right now. But at least give them the choice to be congruent, not just shoot a bunch of smoke and mirrors out at people.
There's always faster. You can always go faster. You can always be better. And there's always more cheap, a cheaper way of doing things, right? So because there's never cheaper, that's why those metrics are never enough.
Yeah,
like that will never be a motivation for someone doing the work.
Yeah. But the one thing about the better, faster, cheaper model, and Cusack brings this up all the time. So you have the 3, pick 2, right? So if you want it better and faster, it's going to be more expensive. If you want it.
Yeah.
So again, everything has there's a cost associated with that approach. And I think something that Jason, you were talking about, and Jay, you were talking about before we started recording, I really think it's the purpose, right? The connection to the message or to the work. If, just like you said, if it's, to make a millionaire some extra dollars, you're not going to go out of your way, but that purpose and connection to the work can create at least a viral instance of some culture change or culture shift.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I don't want to disagree with that, Andrew, But what I want to press on a little bit is because, especially it's 2019, there are some companies that are too big to fail. I mean, let's just be honest. Some companies are too big to fail right now. And we work for some of those companies, right, as consultants, right? And so the idea of, well, you can have it better and faster, but you can't have it cheaper. Guess what companies have plenty of these days? Money. The program that I'm helping, trying to transform right now, they are tens, not just like single digit. They are like $50 million over budget for the year, more than $50 million over budget. They are throwing money at this to try to get better and faster. And they're at this point in time, they're like, we don't even give a shit if it's cheaper. Let's just throw money in this thing. It's almost like a black hole. Let's just keep throwing money at it, see if that'll make it faster. And it's not. So if we're in a position where businesses have plenty of money, better and faster is not enough. We need to do more than that.
But half the time they don't even have a baseline of how fast they were moving before. So to me, it's like all stupid, right? So
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you look at the reports coming out of the Business Agility Institute, where they talk about how, you know, Scrum promises 4 times productivity. Realistically, you're getting about 1.5. SAFe says anywhere between 20 to 50% productivity gains. Realistically, you're looking at somewhere between 5 and 17%, right? So the whole do agile, we go better, you know, quick, faster works, pick 2, right? Where Leff was going. I think we have a whole other episode to go into about that, that false preconceived notion that if you just do this, you will get this exponentially faster, which we all know that. And Jason will tell you, Jason's been doing it. The devil is in the details about how you approach that change, that you could build all the right tools, right? Call a blocker and have them come in and have them build all your pipelines. It doesn't really matter if there's a cultural change that's needed.
The patterns are the important things to look for. I don't know if you guys have seen the 4 stages of disruption data that HBR has been putting out, and they talk about, of course it's in a quadrant because that's what sells, but it's things like, look at the Canadian banks are what you would call an oligopoly. That means a small few control the market, so they don't really need to out-innovate each other or transform. They need to kind of all move at the same speed to protect their whole industry. So this 4 stages of disruption shows things like in durability markets, for example, tires, alcohol. Those will always be around because we're always going to need to move stuff from A to B, and people are always going to need to get fucked up. Right?
Tires and getting fucked up. I like it.
Is that the title of this? Is that the title of this episode?
So sorry to say it that way, but the point is, in the alcohol industry, buying habits will change as people want. The craft beer movement in the 80s, for example, when there was a beer store strike in Canada, craft breweries started to open up. So people started looking at craft beers, and the big players bought those smaller players. So in these durable markets, it's very unlikely that there will be any type of meaningful transformation because there's always going to be a need for that. Medicine, there's always going to be a need for medicine. So it talks about when you're into things like consumer electronics, they don't really need to transform because they already work that way in the first place because they have to. So it's interesting, throw money at the problem. Yeah, sure, that's no problem because that's the industry giant's way of coping with market change. Keep an eye on it. Don't necessarily innovate. Make sure you have a stable base. Buy it when it becomes too disruptive.
Yeah.
So you at least get your piece. And it's unlikely to be something meaningful. Doesn't mean they won't spend millions of dollars on transformation. But for me, I go to a different place of helping people loving coming to work again. The guy at a private thing I did a few weeks ago said, he used to teach inner city kids. And one day he said his mentor meets one of the kids at the door and says, hey, how's it going? You know, what'd you have for breakfast? You ready for school? Blah, blah, blah. And the kid hadn't eaten, so he takes the kid to get some food first. And my friend who I did the session with said, he asked this guy, well, he's going to be late for class. Why are you doing that? He said, if this kid's coming to school hungry, his kids are coming to school hungry. And the way that affects him as a change agent is when he interacts with anybody at work, he is changing their life. They're going home as a parent happier. If they're happier, they're not yelling at their kids. Their kids are growing up more well-adjusted. The kids that their kids hang out with are having better relationships. He says this is bigger than some stupid process improvement program. And we really got to think as change agents, what's the important thing for us? Is it to make a meaningful impact for people, or is it to, you know, write a white paper and become famous?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I hear you. And that, so we're, you know, like 30 minutes in already. And I want to get to like our actual topic, which is what you just talked about, right? So these change, you know, as a change agent, right? So you talked about as a conference, a change agent, you told us a story about this new way of thinking that was trying to get the star across the way. We talked about like how we try to help see, like, so there's this idea of change agents in organizations. Oftentimes as consultants, we get brought in as external change agents, but most of the time these companies have internal folks already trying to, in fact, some of the best transformations or at least maybe not successful, but the ones that I've enjoyed the most have folks advocating for that change within the organization. So Jason, what in your book, how do you refer to these kind of internal change agents? What was the office you were a part of?
The name of our department was the QMO, Quality Management Office, which was the worst name for a change team ever. Because it just smells of quality police, which people thought we were. So just by the name, you're guilty of being enforcers. And,
yeah, it sounds like a name for the testing team.
Yeah, well, because our manager was the old QA manager.
There you go.
And our department name was handpicked by the CEO, and I was told not to fight that because that was his pet thing and something he used at a previous thing. And I'm like, well, that's just stupid, but who cares? Let's work with what we got.
Sure.
I mean, you can go to Cotter's 8 steps. Having a guiding coalition is essentially a change team. What you call it, I think, only matters if people are looking at your SharePoint site. But once they know the people that are on the team and you have the relationships established, the name doesn't matter as much, because I've seen agile change and enablement, transformation team, transformation coaches, change community, whatever.
Yeah.
But
my current client, we call them a transformation team. Jay, what's your office called?
The Agile Value Management Office.
Right. You say that with such like panache, and
I'm not sure how much I really should share without getting myself hung out to dry.
It's like you should be brandishing a rapier while doing that.
Andrew,
hey,
go ahead.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if you printed out the manifesto and made people sign it.
So it's funny you bring
because I work somewhere where they did that.
I was just talking about that, like the membership, right? Like you almost need a membership to do this kind of work, to invest in it. There's something about becoming a member of doing this type of work. Not that I want to promote being, memberships, but I like the idea of the manifesto and having to sign it. You should at least have to read it.
It's only 4 lines. It couldn't take long.
Unfortunately, these days, membership means, membership these days means getting your SPC, but that's another subject. It used to be I'm a coach, I have a CSM, but now that's a different thing. So, all right. So we talked about, so you just mentioned, Jason, that they're in Cotter's 8 Rules of Change, right? What, I guess, in your mind, what is the value of having within the organization internal folks that are advocating for change?
They're the ones that are actually doing the work and have to live with the consequences. So, the idea with the having a guiding coalition, it's a universal thing. if we want something to have as much importance as it should have, we have a group of people dedicated to making sure that gets done. Now, how they go about it, obviously, is the magic part. So, for example, there's a global company that I'm doing some, basically I'm like a change agent help desk for them. So I am behind the scenes, never in the building, never doing anything. They have a core transformation team of 3 people that kind of act as orchestrators, for example. So if you think of the old switchboard operators or the air traffic controllers, they're not creating things and pushing it outwards. They're acting as somebody in the UK solved this problem. I'm going to connect you with the people in Spain who are having this problem. And let's have a conversation about what practices you did to help that group change and do whatever. So I support the support team that's supporting the 50 global change agents who are actually, some of them are agile coaches, some of them are change consultants, some of them are managers in manufacturing that are part of this greater change network. So when designed in a helpful servant leadership type of way, I'm all for it, but I normally see them created as a control center. They're basically created analogous to a PMO to centralize and standardize things and govern. And that's, I mean, in a big telecom or a bank, that's probably the best you're going to do anyway. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are different options.
So you're the help desk for these change agents. Are you putting the blue screen of death on their computers as well?
No, because I'm always at home. I'm never in their offices. If I can get remote access, I probably would. But yeah, no, we meet every 2 weeks for Lean Coffee. So they bring a real problem. We get together, we talk about it. We help them generate some options to go back into the wild, and then they bring the problem back a couple of weeks later, and we see how it went.
I've had virtual Lean coffees all the time, so I love that kind of a thing. So all right, so Andrew, you right, so you hear this and you think what?
I just, like, literally every time I hear someone else talk in this way, just gives me hope because it really feels like, a lot of the work we do is to decommission the myth or demystify the myth around agile and agility and what does it mean to truly do organizational change or whatever buzzword you want to call it. It's exhausting to constantly have to undo the bad to get them to even be open to listening to the good.
Yeah.
So it's that whole, it's honestly, Leff, I honestly think it's that whole thing about semantic diffusion, right? Where a word is used with an original definition, and then as time goes on, that word goes out into the ecosystem and it starts being defined by different people to mean different things, to the point where it's almost like semantic collapse, right? Everybody hears agile and DevOps and they already have a preconceived notion in their head about what that is. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, they don't necessarily know. And I think that's probably a big, I think that's probably a big part of our fight, right? Is just to get the people to understand that it's not Scrum, right? It's not sprints. It's more than that. And I think that's where our pain comes in.
Yeah. And there's one other thing that I've brought it up a couple times. And I think even Jason, you touched on it. I don't know what happens when people leave their house. What changes when they walk through the door of work? Like what mentally changes in their brain that feels that they can behave in such a different way if they are in work versus would you talk to your kids that way? Would you let someone talk to your kids the way that you're addressing the people that work for you? It's just, to me, a very interesting, like, it just boggles my mind.
So I have a question for Jason around the idea of this transformation office, right? So I think about Einstein, who said that you can't solve a problem with the same thinking you used to create it, right? So what has been your experience with, team, groups, organizations, enterprises want to spin up this transformation office and they staff it with a bunch of people. And sometimes it's people who say, hey, sign me up, I want in. But a lot of other times it's almost that like super successful project group, right? Jason, Chris, and Drew are known for getting stuff done. So we're going to treat this like a project and we're going to stick these people in that role. Is that almost a death knell before it gets out the gate? Like what's been your experience with that? And if that is somewhere where someone finds themselves, how do they get the ship? How do they right the ship to get the best results out of that?
To have a conversation around the voluntold aspect, which we did with this global change, because when I did the 2-day liftoff with them, you could tell people were there because they were assigned because of influence and authority. You just know when you're facilitating, you can kind of get that vibe. So I just said, this is what I see. Is this true? It just seems like there's people here that you doesn't seem like you really want to be here, and you're tolerating it. So did you guys have a choice? And the answer was not everyone. So lesson number 1 was nominate people, but allow them to opt out.
Because that's been my experience is that in most companies, they take the dregs. In fact, I've talked to transformation team members in other organizations, and they said, when I got asked to do this, they thought, are you trying to like riff me? Like, is this your way of like firing me? No, many people.
Murman just called me the dregs. Thanks, buddy.
No, I'm not saying. I said in some organizations, because in some organizations, like if it's like they don't have a transformation team, you were already in this position of doing stuff and head in this direction, so it made sense for you. So way to make it about you, Jay. Right when I wasn't even talking about you, you selfish prick. Right, but often organizations, they take the like people that nobody wants, and they go, oh, let's stick them on this transformation team. That really has to feel awful.
Wow.
When you find that out, right?
It's terrible. It's been the opposite for me. It's been authoritarian, who can get this thing under control attitude. Or the other pattern is when it's people when there's too many people. I've seen this in 3 occasions where the whole transformation team is very strong left side manifesto and curious, passionate, extremely positive intent under what they're trying to do. And they run so fast that it disrupts the team boundaries in the organization. And then the top leadership says, we need a manager to sit on top of this group now. They're out of control. And I've seen 3 full teams quit within a year.
That's my experience every time. That's my experience every time.
Yeah, the organization will never go as fast as our personal change experience does, especially in the enterprise. So we need a balance of both. We need a voice of reason. We need the disruptors. We need the creative people. We need the data analysts. We need the people with good relationship skills. And no one person can have all of that. So we need a good balance across the hierarchy. Just the same way you would put together a cross-functional agile team, a cross-functional transformation team that does things like, when I would exit teams, we do an exit interview. Rate how effective it was having a coach from 0 to 10 and why. Rate the effectiveness of your coach from 0 to 10 and a comment why. And what do you wish we would have done? And what's next? And that's it. And it's public data for everybody to see. So instead of, hey, let's measure the velocity of the team to see if the coach is doing a good job, let's ask the team if it was a good experience, because I've had 4 personal coaches in my career, and I could not quantify how to measure that other than all of those experiences were awesome. Even if I got one tiny thing out of it, it led to something bigger down the road. But we get locked into this measurement of how do we measure the coaches?
So I'm going to toss that to Leff in a second, talking about measuring coaches. But real quick, what I want to say to your point of like the thinkers, right? The aspirational thinkers needing some sort of oversight and rational thinking. You give anybody the learning that we've experienced, right? You open their eyes to what the left side does, right? You give, whether it's through a framework, whether it's through a conference, whether it's through whatever, you give them just a taste of that. And all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, I want the whole organization to drink from this fire hose because this is amazing. And then they hold that fire hose to everybody and they say, ready? And then there's like, it makes sense to have a manager to say, hold on, like, let's give them a little bit right? We can't, if we give them too much, right, we're going to chase them away, and they're going to, and everybody's like, but no, it's really, really great. Like, let me just tell you about this. There's these 9 principles and then whatever, right? And you get going. But that, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Andrew. Andrew, what's it like to be measured as a coach?
Well, it depends on who's measuring and what checklist they're using. So I have I'm more of a kind of a cerebral kind of coach. So when I put together a coaching sheet to not rate coaches, but just to see where you are. I mean, I very much look at it as, does my coach care for me? And this is one of my coaching mentors that kind of instilled this technique with me, and it's worked well. It's, can I trust my coach?
Mm-hmm.
Do I have, are they really invested? Are they selfless? Are they, and then your own coaching, kind of compass as far as, do I check my emotions? Do I regularly suspend my judgment?
How do I show up for them?
Yeah. So I think that to me is, I don't know what metrics companies think they can use to rate coaches, because velocity is, it's just a math problem. So to me, it's silly. I mean, it's not, Cusack says this all the time. If I'm coaching a football team, I'm not running on the field taking snaps, right? Like, these are the expectations that I have of the people that I'm coaching, and these are the expectations that I want to know that they have of me as their coach. So it's clear. It's a level playing field.
A lot of it's feel. It's not quantifiable. It's just I had one interview. An organization asked me, how are we going to measure your effectiveness as the coach or the change agent? And I said, why don't in the lobby you put up a big sign how much you're paying me, and have people say from 0 to 10 if they're getting their money's worth. And I wish they would have did it, because that would be such an awesome picture to show. But
what about a picture of you that just says, "We'll coach for tips"?
Yeah.
and like a bucket.
Yeah.
And you're like a painted statue, except you've got really long, like your hockey hairdo.
Yeah.
Like you're in an Oilers jersey, and you're like,
yeah.
So I have a question for Jason. I know ostensibly we wanted to talk about the transformation office, right? But I wanted to ask you, Jason, what are your thoughts on this? I came across a quote, I think it was by Simon Wardley, he of Wardley Mapping, and it was on Twitter the other day. And he posted, it was a back and forth conversation between him and someone else. And he made the remark that when you step into an organization, you're trying to introduce a change, especially a massive change like an agile transformation. His remark was, you've got 90 days. You've got 90 days to make an efficient change. And then, and his exact words were something along the lines of, then the antibodies will start to reject you and start to, the organizational antibodies.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, is that an accurate statement? Like, do you really got to get in and move quick? And if so, how do we prevent those antibodies from actually taking us down before we even get a chance to get some rocks over the hill?
Yes, I agree with that completely, which is one of the reasons why I stopped doing any long-term consulting stuff a long time ago. It's bursts. It's help them make sense of their current environment and what road they want to go down. So do you know what you're in for? Are you willing to accept the things that we can't anticipate right now? Here's a bunch of stories, here's a bunch of experience, but all this type of stuff. If you want to do it, let's do it. So for me, the 90 days plus the idea of intervening at the right rituals. A lot of companies that do annual budgeting and planning, if they do that in August or September timeframe for all of the next year, October is a horrible time to start a transformation because there's way too much inertia already. You're never going to overcome that. So it's pointless to start. It's the same thing with the 90 days. You're going to know if the system is ready to change within that time period. And if you don't, number one, as the coach, you get sucked into their reality. So you are now inside the box and you start to do what, I was in this one organization, they had 5 layers of hierarchy in their Agile COE.
Jesus Christ.
I'm watching Murman just sort of twitch in the video.
Jesus Christ.
They took on the shape of the existing organizational pattern. So if you're there for a longer period of time, the more likely you're going to get sucked into the Borg collective, if you will.
Yeah, Agile Uprisers, see our podcast on hierarchy within Agile coaching for more about this topic. We went extensively down this road of like, what is a team coach versus a program coach?
Yeah.
What is an enterprise coach? And the different like prestige that's involved with those sorts of things, which doesn't really matter a hill of beans in the end. Okay, so transformation offices, right? So we're still going in the path. Right, you talked about it a little bit, Jason, but like why, like it's great to have them ground you in, okay, here's your theory, here's your principles made realistic with this organization. Here's what this organization is capable of right now. That's the value of them, right? But they can really like stunt a lot of the work that we try to do. What's your experience been about how they get in the way?
How transformation teams get in the way?
Yeah. How do they make it harder?
One thing I've seen is they add more process and stuff for programs and teams to do without taking existing stuff away, because they're a bolt-on department. There's probably already multiple PMOs potentially, and an enterprise PMO, and a process improvement team, and an innovation team, and now an agile team. And you've got all these different groups that are working in similar spaces that are all colliding with each other. And they get locked into the same pattern as the others. We're spending $3 million a year on this transformation office. Where's the evidence that I'm getting my $3 million worth? And that evidence is usually, here's how many teams we've lifted off, here's how many blah, 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 here's how many people have gone through our agile waterboarding training, and blah, blah, blah.
There may be a market for that, Jason. You might want to trademark that.
Yeah, I was about to say, is that a framework I smell cooking?
Yes. I stole it from John Stahl, so. Yeah. So the pattern falls very much in line. If you, this is something to Google afterwards, but the work of Herbert Blumer, who pioneered the work in social change theory, whereas when there's a change in a system, the first stage is emergence, where there's a lot of uncertainty. People are upset with how things work. So somebody does something and change starts to happen, but it's emergent. It's not structured. It's very chaotic. Lots of uncertainty. We don't know exactly where we're going. And then we get to a certain point where we feel we need more structure, and we start to coalesce, which is the second stage. So we put a little bit of structure in place so it doesn't feel so painful. Then the third stage, if we take that too far, we go to bureaucratization, and we try to institutionalize what we were trying to do in the first place, which leads to the fourth stage, which is decline. So the pattern of what I see with transformation teams is one of the sub-stages of decline is co-optation, which is basically we used our old values of the organization to try to transform to a new state. So if our old values were command and control, we use the same command and control values to build our change team or our transformation team. We held them to the same processes and the same operating models and mental models as the old world. So we get the same result. So somewhere in that coalescence bureaucratization curve is when we have a choice. That's the 90-day window. We have lots of chaos. We've done lots of experiments. We've tried some things. One telecom I worked for, we did what was called a mini Big Bang. And 10 teams started. We went from 0 to 200 teams in 2 years. So many teams went agile, it made it impossible for the ops teams to keep up. That's the jump from coalescence to bureaucratization, because that's your organization telling you that you should not have a centralized ops team. They should be merged into the teams, and you should now switch to value streams or stacks. That's a natural transition to an agile organization. They went the opposite. Well, screw this. We're going to make it harder for teams to release because we can't keep up with all these processes.
Which I'm sure meant that no backdooring happened or no drive-bys, like none of those ever happened, right?
Oh, they would still happen, but you can understand it. I mean, if you're in that centralized group and you're used to a lockstep, release train kind of schedule, and now you're getting bombarded with so many packages every week, and you don't have the people to manage that, your only defense is control in those organizations, unless you choose to have a different conversation about how we're structured. But we don't have time for that. We got commitments for these releases. They got to get out the door. We'll do it next quarter. Those are the periods where we shift into co-optation. If we don't consciously say, somebody at the top says, you know what, screw half of our releases. We're pushing them all to the next quarter. Let's figure this out. Because they're putting their neck on the line. It's, all this stuff is a lot more complicated than we think. And it's all system dynamics, and it's all people relationships, and it's all humans love the easy answer. Because, you guys know what it's like being a coach. It's fucking exhausting because you're on all the time.
Yeah.
You can't go on autopilot because that's not the job description.
That's a
Leff,
great point.
you had a question. Leff, what was your question?
Yeah, so one of the things it just popped into my head, I'd be curious, and as you talk about, these relationships and people, Jason, in your experience working with agile transformation offices, and I've worked with a fair share myself, have you experienced when someone is leading up that agile transformation office that comes from internal, part of the organization, right? Do they fall victim of being, a result of the system that they work in and their culture? Or do you see it being more beneficial coming in from the outside, that you don't have the emotional baggage that the organization has, you haven't learned it yet?
It's the combination of both is where I've seen it work the most. I've worked in some where the internal, sponsoring SVP is known for being highly disruptive anyway. So it's no problem for that person to go in and shake things up. I think the balance of having an external perspective helps whoever the internal people are. I worked with one team where it was the VP of operations was their sponsor for the transformation, and she was very conservative but super, super smart. She took all the emotion out of pretty much everything, and she just needed a different perspective and data, and she'd make the right choice. It was always usually more of a conservative choice, but I think the balance of somebody that knows the culture, and if they're presented with options they wouldn't have thought of before, they now can consciously choose to swim against the cultural norms or decide now's not the right time for option X. I'm going to take option A instead for now, because they know the political environment.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Sorry, Jay, just one more final thought around that is, I often think that hearing you talk through that, the balance, right? I almost feel like that's like the coaching gift. You have to be able to find the balance within the organization and get people to understand what that even means. So you can approach things differently. So I love the way you phrase that.
Organizational physics, trademark.
Yeah, I love it.
I've seen that somewhere.
Oh shit! I gotta go register that domain.
It makes Leff. You just made me think of. I think I wrote a blog post years ago. I think when we first started talking about it, I think I called it Cerberus, right? So my thought was, in any type of transformation like this, especially when it comes to massive organizational change, you need an internal champion, you need an external champion, and then you need an executive champion. I think that was my theory, right? You need someone internally who has the organizational cachet, who has the reputation, that can say, okay, look, this is what we want to do, and I'm going to have to live with whatever we suggest. You need an external expert to come in and say, well, here's how in a neutral, an academic application, here's what you'd see. But then you also, my thought was, I forgot why I originally read this, you want an executive change person. You want someone from the top down saying, hey, this is really somewhere we want to march towards. I know it's not going to be fun, but let's do it.
Yeah, and something you just said too, Jay, and I'd be curious, does the size matter? Well, sorry, I can't believe I just said that out loud. But all people just don't like change. It's a resistor. People are resistant to it. So what could be small in the grand scheme of things could be actually a very big impact to a person or a group of people. So I think it's kind of misleading. Like, how do you size it? Change is change to me. Maybe I'm thinking too simple.
I don't know that I've experienced, I don't know, Jason, about you, but I've experienced change in so many different, like I've experienced change within a 50-person org and in 100 and now working in like a 2,000-person org. Like it's kind of the same thing, just the good and the bad scale, like relatively, equally, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's the same.
Yeah. Just think network nodes, the same way you would manage dependencies on a 2,000-person program. You're managing where those networks are intersecting with each other. So small autonomous transformation teams in various departments or product lines, if you will, and when they have to step out of bounds into someone else's territory, the link is important to manage. I mean, there's only 4 elements of organizational design that are as old as dirt, and it's how we have people organized by function, by geography, by product, by region, by whatever. Second one is how are we linking them together when they need to coordinate through projects, through physical location, through tools that we use, etc. 3, how do we align them towards a common purpose? And 4, is it working? If you strip away all the process models and all the magic that's, coming out of different certifications, those 4 things is organizational design. And I shouldn't say we need, having a support transformation office that's like the air traffic control tower that helps, the transformation sub-team that's working with the baggage handlers and the ticket counter and the pilots know what's going on all the way around. So, hey, you know what? You guys over here in IT in Prague, you don't have to reinvent whatever. Go talk to these people in Australia. They've already done it, and they can help you out with it. That's a supporting function of a central transformation office that could scale infinitely, because you don't need these 2 different regions or programs to work exactly the same. But you can help each other out, knowing full well that how many times have you guys been in organizations where, a year later they've said, hey, you know what, we should really try this thing. And it's an idea you talked about a year ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
They have to go through it and live it. Tesla's a great example. People rag on them all the time because manufacturing is a solved problem. How can these idiots have such a hard time with it? Because they haven't done it before. It doesn't. Right. All the theory doesn't matter when you actually get your hands in the dirt. So if that group on top is a support structure that follows a similar metaphor to the air traffic controller, I think it shapes the approach of change a bit differently.
I love it. So we're hitting the 60-minute mark, so I'm going to land this plane with one last question. So we talked about the air traffic controller plane, right? The air traffic controller tower, kind of looking over everything, watching everything. So I'll ask Jason, and then I'll ask Andrew and Jay and myself, and then we'll close out. What do those transformational offices need to be successful? I know you can just say it in like 5 words and it'll blow minds, and then we'll just run and snag those URLs itself.
I'll say the first thought that came into my brain, it went right to courage to have the conversation around expectations and the congruence to not compromise your own needs as the people who are in that transformation office just for the sake of placating.
Wow. I love it. Jay, you're up next.
I'm gonna bootstrap off of Jason's. I think along with that courage, if you're gonna create a transformation office and you're gonna staff it with very smart people who are interested in the change, I think they need to be visibly empowered, and that message needs to come down that, look, we are trusting our future in the hands of these people. Please give them the respect and empower them, because otherwise they're just yelling into the wind.
Says the person that's yelling into the wind a lot of times. Do you feel like you're properly empowered right now where you're at in your transformation, Jay?
I think we are. I mean, I really think there's what we say, like, a lot of the things Jason said are rattling around in my head. Like, because I'm always trying to figure out, am I doing that? Are we doing that? No, I think we are empowered. I think everybody does give us an ear and give us a list. Granted, we're multi-years in, so I think we've earned that cachet. If I had to speculate on my current spot and where I think we could go a little better, I think a stronger top-down message would be very helpful, just to consistently reiterate, right? I mean, it's hard for me to tell my peers, look, we really should do this. It's the best way to do it. And I could go through every sales pitch and change thing I know, but there are some people who are truly only motivated by the stick coming down from the top of the totem pole. And I think that's where just a strong message of, hey, this is for all of us. I need you bought in, I think would help. But yeah, I feel pretty empowered. A lot of the things I say, I think get listened to.
It's because you're scary. It's because you're big and scary.
Yeah, could be.
Andrew Leff, what about you? What do transformation offices need to be successful?
I think to me, they need to inspire the organization, not just to do things different, but to behave and be different, right? So to enable people to be different, not just telling them to do something or their process differently. So to me, process is process. So if the emotion is still negative, they carry that through. So that's where I see it. Them having a integral part in it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Balancing process with reality. You didn't quite say it that way, but I think that so often we learn something and we think that what we learned is, if I just tell people the thing that I learned, it makes sense to us, right? These change agents, they learn something and the scales fall from their eyes and they think, wow, this is so simple. Let's just do this. And they think telling people is going to make change happen. And so I guess if I could give any advice to transformation office, is that telling isn't change, right? Like sharing information, sharing slides, doing a lunch and learn, right? Doing a webinar, whatever it is, telling is not change. And you gotta, to quote our guest, like, you gotta live it, right? You gotta live it for a little bit and then see what happens, so to speak. So Jason, you're writing a sequel to your book that you told me via email, right? So or via Twitter, what's that process been like? What's that process been like going down this path once again of change?
This one's been harder because it's based on the last, I guess almost now 6 years of data collected from workshops all over the world and visiting various different companies around five aspects that were the most important for change agents. No matter if they were agile coaches, change managers, HR people, whatever, there were kind of 5 universals that help us move change forward. And the key is in how you as a person looks through those 5 dimensions and chooses to use the models and tools that are out there in drastically different ways. So you can think of it as a puzzle, is kind of the general idea.
Well, I was thinking the 5 hockey sticks of change, right?
That might be better.
Yeah. It just dawned on me. You have a Carolina Hurricanes t-shirt on right now. Is that, are you betraying your country right now?
No, the Oilers have been playing crappy the last few days and Carolina beat them in the Stanley Cup in 2006. So I thought if I wore the opposite shirt, it would inspire, the team would get really mad at me and play well. And they were beating Columbus 4-1 before we started. So it worked.
So the message to internal transformation offices is superstition and wearing the other team's colors, they work, right? Yes. So if there's anything that our guests can teach you that today, it's wear the other company's colors. You'll be great. I don't know how else to land this plane, so I'm going to do that.
You just crashed it.
Yeah. Let's crash it.
You didn't land.
No. I said I landed it. Damn it. You shut up, Andrew. You're muted. For Jason Little, for Andrew Leff, for Jay Hrcsko, guys, thank you so much for the chat. This is the Agile Uprising podcast. If you love us, if you like what we're doing, if you even sort of want to acknowledge us as we pass in the hallways, rate us and subscribe on your podcast app of choice. And there's Patreon and there's the Coalition, and even hit us up. We've got some new stickers that we'd love to send you in terms of transformation. So I am Chris Murman, and we are signing out. Thank you.
Freeflation is currently leaving economists baffled and scratching their heads. Getting more for less? It's true for those who switch to Cricut and get a free Samsung Galaxy A14 5G. Switch and see why people love Cricut. Smile, you're on Cricut. Real customer paid for testimonial, limited time. Must bring your number to Cricut on a 5-minute $55 a month voice plan. First month service charge and tax due at sale. Free terms and other restrictions apply. See CricutWireless.com for details. Switch and see why people love Cricut. Smile, you're on Cricut.
Backyard in need of some professional help? If you've got a messy landscape including a shed filled with junk, trees that need trimming, or RVs and fifth wheels that need hauling off, leave the mess to the experts. Get your free estimate at clayscleanup.com.